So good evening and welcome to the fourth in our series of public lectures and seminars given by distinguished visiting speaker, Professor Naman Ahuja of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Over the course of the last week, Dr. Ahuja has spoken to us on topics related to the core foundations of visual culture in India. He's spoken of cultic iconography, public and domestic cults, goddess figures and shrines, and the relationship of antiquities and mass production in ancient societies. On Friday, he presided over the opening of our Borderlands exhibition, Margins and Materiality, in the W.G. Hardy Classics Museum. Over the weekend, he participated in our Classical Association of the Canadian West Conference on the margins of antiquity. And the week is not yet over. In inviting him to this latitude in the Northern Hemisphere, we might possibly have mentioned that it was going to be cold and there was going to be a few hours of daylight and so forth. We might possibly have forgotten to mention that here a week lasts 10 days. So he will be speaking to our graduate students in a seminar on Thursday, and tonight he will be speaking to us in his last public lecture on the Chandayana manuscript from Hindustan. Dr. Ahuja has a PhD from the University of London and has lectured in Indian art at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies. He's been curator of Indian art in the Department of Oriental Antiquities in the British Museum and has catalogued ancient Indian antiquities in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, organized an international symposium at Yale, and he's authored numerous books and articles, including Divine Presence, The Arts of India and the Himalayas in 2003, and The Making of the Modern Indian Artist, Devi Prasad, in 2011. The talk tonight is sponsored by the University of Alberta Distinguished Visitors Fund, as well as the Department of History and Classics, and the program in Religious Studies. We're also grateful to the Asian Tribune, which features an article on Dr. Ahuja and tonight's talk. The title of the talk tonight is the Chandayana, one of the earliest Sufi manuscripts from Hindustan. And please welcome, once again, Dr. Ahuja.
Thank you very much. I am quite overwhelmed by your hospitality. It's been very generous. And I want to make a departure from my previous talks and go into a completely different terrain today. I'd like to look at the early medieval world of India and what was happening in the time between about the 12th to the 16th centuries, on the eve of the arrival of the Mughals. A very different period, not my main area of academic expertise, but some years ago, when I was a student, I was shown some rather remarkable manuscripts, and I began to discuss them with Robert Skelton, who used to be keeper of the Indian collections at the V&A. And then I joined classes that were being taught by Linda Leach at SOAS in those days, and we discussed these manuscripts more. And she was busy writing up the catalogue of the Chester Beatty collection in Dublin in those days. And then I developed a great friendship and fondness for Simon Digby, one of the most maverick and extraordinary eccentrics who specialized in India, who had traversed on foot the length and breadth of Hindustan and knew every site at the back of his hand. And he was incredibly generous in sharing his knowledge about that period with me. And so this project, which I've never published, but one day will, as homage to Simon and Linda, who are both not with us anymore, to actually discuss a rather remarkable Sufi story as it came to happen in India. Now, the Chandayan is more commonly known as the Laur-Chanda. The Laur-Chanda is a poem on the romance of two lovers, Lauric and Chanda, widely sung and performed in various regional languages by professionals and non-professionals alike. The popularity of this folklore spans eastern India, western Bihar, the region of Uttar Pradesh, into the Chhattisgarh area, which is a part of, well, now a separate state, but part of Madhya Pradesh previously. It was very popular in the 14th century. It's a strange story because it's not about a particular ritual or a festival. Its hero and heroine are not deified, and its performance is not associated with possession or the promise and fulfillment of religious vows. Rather, it is sung largely for entertainment, except when this oral epic of a non-literate society was used by a local Sufi pir, a local Sufi seer, Mullah Daud by name, to convey a Sufi message under a newly invented title for this book called the Chandayan. Historical sources confirm that Mullah Daud was active around the reign of the Delhi Sultan Firoz Shah Tughlaq in about the period who reigned between 1351 to 1388. So somewhere towards the third quarter of the 14th century. He was under the direct patronage of a nobleman, the Khane-Jahan Jona Khan. Mullah Daud hailed from a place called Dalmau. Dalmau is a tiny town in Uttar Pradesh, and there's still a fort there, which is dated to about the 14th, 15th centuries. He had been a follower of a particular Sufi sheikh of Delhi by the name of Chirag-e-Dehli. And being a Sufi follower of Chirag-e-Dehli's, he was trying to take the Sufi message more widely into Eastern India. Not only did Mullah Daud convert this folk epic into a set bourgeois literate text, he also, and this is significant, converted it from a secular telling into a religious Sufi story. This manuscript is known to us today from many different folkloric versions. Now, although imperfectly understood, this story came to occupy an important place in the history of Indian painting. It is surprising that for a period when we have scant painted material, there are 5 known illustrated manuscripts of the Chandayan. Furthermore, although many of the pages seem to have been lost, by all accounts it seems that they were extremely large and profusely illustrated manuscripts. The first of them is one which is called the Chora Panchasika style manuscript, which, well, this is material which I've already read out or spoken of. Here we are. There are 5 illustrated Chandayans that are known to us today. One was what was called the Chora Panchasika style, a pre-Mughal style of painting in India. And this one used to lie in the Lahore Museum till 1948, when it was divided between Karachi, Lahore, and Chandigarh. Then there is another one of which only 6 pages have been found, which lies in a museum in Varanasi. The third is in what we call the typically Sultanate style, and it has 60 folios, which are divided between what we used to call the Prince of Wales Museum, Bombay, but is now called the Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya, Mumbai. Like everything in Bombay is called Chhatrapati Shivaji something or the other. And then there is, that manuscript is divided between various American collections, including a large amount in the Binney collection in San Diego and in the Brooklyn Museum. And the rest of it is in the museum in Mumbai. The fourth one is a unique manuscript which lies in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, with a large number of illustrated pages. And then there is the fifth one, which is in a mixed style with a lot of borrowing on the tradition of Jain painting, which was already around in India, And that lies in the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin. So it's these 5 manuscripts that I've been trying to pull together and reconstitute. None of the surviving manuscripts are complete. They all have one illustrated page, and facing them is a page of text. The ones which have a large number of pages have all been rebound, and they haven't been rebound in the right order. So it's quite a job trying to reconstruct the story in the correct sequence, because the pagination that we have at the moment has been put in by some librarian at some point in the 17th, 18th, or 19th centuries, and it doesn't follow the original format. Okay, before we get down further to analyzing the manuscripts and the kind of painting that they have, I thought I should give you a little background about the story and why this story is so interesting and important, and then we can deconstruct.
So good evening and welcome to the 4th in our series of public lectures and seminars given by distinguished visiting speaker, Professor Naman Ahuja of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Over the course of the last week, Dr. Ahuja has spoken to us on topics related to the core foundations of visual culture in India. He's spoken of cultic iconography, public and domestic cults, goddess figures and shrines, and the relationship of antiquities and mass production in ancient societies. On Friday, he presided over the opening of our Borderlands exhibition, Margins and Materiality, in the W.G. Hardy Classics Museum. Over the weekend, he participated in our Classical Association of the Canadian West Conference on the margins of antiquity. And the week is not yet over. Inviting him to this latitude in the Northern Hemisphere, we might possibly have mentioned that it was going to be cold and there was going to be a few hours of daylight and so forth. We might possibly have forgotten to mention that here a week lasts 10 days. So he will be speaking to our graduate students in a seminar on Thursday, and tonight he will be speaking to us in his last public lecture on the Chandayana manuscript from Hindustan. Dr. Ahuja has a PhD from the University of London and has lectured in Indian art at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies. He's been curator of Indian art in the Department of Oriental Antiquities in the British Museum and has catalogued ancient Indian antiquities in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, organized an international symposium at Yale, and he's authored numerous books and articles, including Divine Presence, The Arts of India and the Himalayas in 2003, and The Making of the Modern Indian Artist, Devi Prasad, in 2011. The talk tonight is sponsored by the University of Alberta Distinguished Visitors Fund, as well as the Department of History and Classics and the Program in Religious Studies. We're also grateful to the Asian Tribune, which features an article on Dr. Ahuja and tonight's talk. The title of the talk tonight is the Chandayana, one of the earliest Sufi manuscripts from Hindustan. And please welcome, once again, Dr. Ahuja.
Thank you very much. I am quite overwhelmed by your hospitality. It's been very generous. And I want to make a departure from my previous talks and go into a completely different terrain today. I'd like to look at the early medieval world of India and what was happening in the time between about the 12th to the 16th centuries on the eve of the arrival of the Mughals. A very different period, not my main area of academic expertise, but some years ago, when I was a student, I was shown some rather remarkable manuscripts. And I began to discuss them with Robert Skelton, who used to be keeper of the Indian collections at the V&A. And then I joined classes that were being taught by Linda Leach at SOAS in those days, and we discussed these manuscripts more. And she was busy writing up the catalogue of the Chester Beatty collection in Dublin in those days. And then I developed a great friendship and fondness for Simon Digby, one of the most maverick and extraordinary eccentrics who specialized in India, who had traversed on foot the length and breadth of Hindustan and knew every site at the back of his hand. And he was incredibly generous in sharing his knowledge about that period with me. And so this project, which I've never published, but one day will, as homage to Simon and Linda, who are both not with us anymore, to actually discuss a rather remarkable Sufi story as it came to happen in India. Now, the Chandayan is more commonly known as the Laur-Chanda. The Laur-Chanda is a poem on the romance of two lovers, Lauric and Chanda, widely sung and performed in various regional languages by professionals and non-professionals alike. The popularity of this folklore spans eastern India, western Bihar, the region of Uttar Pradesh, into the Chhattisgarh area, which is a part of, well, now a separate state, but part of Madhya Pradesh previously. It was very popular in the 14th century. It's a strange story because it's not about a particular ritual or a festival. Its hero and heroine are not deified, and its performance is not associated with possession or the promise and fulfillment of religious vows. Rather, it is sung largely for entertainment, except when this oral epic of a non-literate society was used by a local Sufi pir, a local Sufi seer, Mullah Daud by name, to convey a Sufi message under a newly invented title for this book called the Chandayan. Historical sources confirm that Mullah Daud was active around the reign of the Delhi Sultan Firoz Shah Tughlaq in about the period who reigned between 1351 to 1388. So somewhere towards the third quarter of the 14th century. He was under the direct patronage of a nobleman, the Khan-e-Jahan Jona Khan. Mullah Daud hailed from a place called Dalmau. Dalmau is a tiny town in Uttar Pradesh, and there's still a fort there, which is dated to about the 14th, 15th centuries. He had been a follower of a particular Sufi sheikh of Delhi by the name of Chirag-e-Dehli. And being a Sufi follower of Chirag-e-Dehli's, he was trying to take the Sufi message more widely into Eastern India. Not only did Mullah Daud convert this folk epic into a set bourgeois literate text, he also, and this is significant, converted it from a secular telling into a religious Sufi story. This manuscript is known to us today from many different folkloric versions. Now, although imperfectly understood, this story came to occupy an important place in the history of Indian painting. It is surprising that for a period when we have scant painted material, there are 5 known illustrated manuscripts of the Chandayan. Furthermore, although many of the pages seem to have been lost, by all accounts it seems that they were extremely large and profusely illustrated manuscripts. The first of them is one which is called the Chora Panchasika style manuscript, which, well, this is material which I've already read out or spoken of. Here we are. There are 5 illustrated Chandayans that are known to us today. One was what was called the Chora Panchasika style, a pre-Mughal style of painting in India. And this one used to lie in the Lahore Museum till 1948, when it was divided between Karachi, Lahore, and Chandigarh. Then there is another one, of which only 6 pages have been found, which lies in a museum in Varanasi. The third is in what we call the typically Sultanate style. And it has 60 folios, which are divided between what we used to call the Prince of Wales Museum, Bombay, but is now called the Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya, Mumbai. Like everything in Bombay is called Chhatrapati Shivaji something or the other. And then there is, that manuscript is divided between various American collections, including a large amount in the Binney collection in San Diego and in the Brooklyn Museum. And the rest of it is in the museum in Mumbai. The fourth one is a unique manuscript which lies in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, with a large number of illustrated pages. And then there is the fifth one, which is in a mixed style with a lot of borrowing on the tradition of Jain painting, which was already around in India. And that lies in the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin. So it's these 5 manuscripts that I've been trying to pull together and reconstitute. None of the surviving manuscripts are complete. They all have one illustrated page, and facing them is a page of text. The ones which have a large number of pages have all been rebound, and they haven't been rebound in the right order. So it's quite a job trying to reconstruct the story in the correct sequence, because the pagination that we have at the moment has been put in by some librarian at some point in the 17th, 18th, or 19th centuries, and it doesn't follow the original format. Okay, before we get down further to analyzing the manuscripts and the kind of painting that they have, I thought I should give you a little background about the story and why this story is so interesting and important, and then we can deconstruct it. So he runs along to try and find this girl. Now, news of the fact that he was going to march upon poor Meher Sahadev, the girl's father, reaches Govar, the town in which Chanda lives. And Meher Sahadev doesn't quite know how he is going to protect his daughter's honor and his town, till somebody tells him that in his town lives a mercenary by the name of Laur-Chanda. And this is when our hero finally makes his entry, the hero of the story. So Meher Sahadev contacts the local mercenary, the local strongman, and beseeches him to protect his and his daughter's honor. He offers him, since he's a mercenary, he offers him 2 fine Arabian steeds, and he, you see him, was it there, the previous, here he is. The brave Laur-Chanda ends up seeking Meher Sahadev's blessing and patronage to fight. And you can see him inspecting the horses, and he's now going to go out to battle. He wins. I'm going to cut the story short. A bloody battle ensued, and Laur-Chanda won the battle. And the fact that he had won, this information is communicated in her apartment to Chanda. And here you see Laur-Chanda riding back on his elephant, and Chanda is being given the news in her apartment. Chanda, however, is not too happy with life. She's stuck in her apartment, she's been trapped, even though the boys are gossiping all over about this beautiful girl. Gossip, as I was saying, was in the air, and news of rival claimants to his wife even reaches the noble quarters of Baban. Baban is Chanda's estranged husband, who needs to save his honor and bring his wife back home. he prepares his troops, and the poor Sahadev has no choice but to approach Lorik once again to help him out. Now, Lorik is actually married, right? And he's married to a woman called Mena. And Mena and Lorik's mother, Colin, don't like the fact that he is going out again and again to fight for the honor of the local Rai Sahib's daughter. And this happens time and again, and Lorik is now being called upon again to fight for this girl, and they don't quite like this. And they disapprove and they try and stop him. They're disapproving, they try and stop him, but he, as you can see, has got into his armor and he's ready to go and battle. It's a fantastic war. And these are 3 pages from the Rylands Library manuscript, the Manchester manuscript. And you can see that there are cannon, guns, cavalry. These are things which are newly incorporated into the Indian environment in the Sultanate period. This had come in with the Islamic warriors into India. Then there are war elephants and archers with tricks of old. And there you can see particularly, there is a horseman firing a part-hill shot as he looks behind him. So old tricks of warfare still in place. Elephants, a traditional Indian animal used in war. And then of course you've got newfangled warfare coming into the Indian subcontinent. So a nice documentation of what's going on in India. And of course there are these decapitated heads lying around. Lorik decimated the opponents, and Carrion feasted on their remains. And you can see over here that you've got vultures graphically picking the eyes out of the heads that are lying scattered on a blood-stained ground. And this carries on page after page. Now there's an entire genre of Jain painting that existed at this time, a group of manuscripts called the Karni Bharni manuscripts. Karni Bharni manuscripts are made which are stories about, they're literally, as you sow, so shall you reap. It's about what karma you have accrued in your life, and you will be sent to a hell that is appropriate, and the different tortures that happen in different types of hells are graphically illustrated in these medieval Jain manuscripts. And this comes out of a very similar type of manuscript in which such paintings were often made of descriptions of hell, of different kinds of hell. Now, our hero comes back into the city. This time, Chanda decides to sit in the balcony and watch him come back because she's heard great stories about this man. And as she watches, along with her friend, Lorik coming back into the town victorious. Now, the height of his howdah on his elephant is broadly at the same height as her first floor balcony. And their eyes met, and she swooned when she saw this fabulously handsome man who has defended her honor yet again. Now you see, the fact is that Lorik is in every way the alter ego of Chanda's husband. He's Bhavan's alter in every possible way. Not only is he strong and virile, and not only has he defended her honor time and again, but he is also a man who has who comes from a low caste background. He is an ahir. He lives on the margins of society, whereas she is a noble lady, well-born and very pretty, and he is this rustic lad. He is also married, and the other thing is that he fights for a living. He's a mercenary, whereas she will only be wedded to somebody else who is a landlord. So she comes from a very different kind of stock, and he is something completely separate and different. So this is the difference between them is established quite clearly, and the fact that it would be impossible for them to be married is quite clear right from the beginning. However, a courtship ensues. And this is when we really get to know our hero. Now, before I get into the details of the courtship, I think we need to step back for a moment. And we have to realize that this was not going to be easy, this courtship. So what we have instead is that things have to happen a little slowly. So the first thing is that all the boys congratulate Lauric for his victory. And he has to give them all a treat. And the treat he chooses to give them, and you can see then that he's got betel nut, a pan made. I don't know how many of you have eaten pans in your life, but here he is distributing pans amongst his friends. And there's the betel leaf with catechu and other things in it, lime, so on. A pan is a very distinctly Indian item of food, not something that the Sultanate kings of Persia were familiar with. But they took to it. And one of the earliest recipe books, written at about the same time when this painting was made, called the Nimat-Nama, in Mandu, in Western India, has a page or two devoted to the fact that the Sultan, the Persian Sultan who has come to live in India, is fascinated by this item of food called the pan. And it's about a cultural encounter between two civilizations and how food becomes the space of and the site of that encounter. So it's much the same thing. You find over here Lauric is busy distributing this treat to his friends. And on the other hand, in her apartment, Chanda is busy looking in a mirror. She hasn't picked up a mirror for the past year, and she's suddenly taking interest in herself and her appearance once again. And she's getting interested in life. And so you know that there's a sort of flirtation that is beginning, a romance that's going to start blossoming. However, it's not easy for the couple to meet. Now, the fair Chanda is at her balcony with her Kanis, her friend and confidant, Biraspat. And Biraspat stages plots. She's like her lady-in-waiting. And Biraspat arranges for rendezvous between the couple. But before she can arrange these rendezvous, she advises Lauric. She says, you've got to first test the waters and see, is the man really worth it? And she gives Lauric a test and said that if you really want to meet my mistress, she says, then you better get dressed and live as a yogi, as a sadhu, in the local temple. And Lauric decides to change his attire, and you can see he dons the robes of a wandering mendicant, like an ascetic, and he goes and takes residence in the local temple. What's interesting is that the deity at the local temple is an unrecognizable fictional deity. And the painter has deliberately done this. He's made him into a monstrous and deliberately unrecognizable deity because, remember, this is now a Sufi manuscript in an Islamic context. It's no longer a Hindu story. So the deity must not be recognizable, lest the people who are seeing the pages of this book start worshipping the deity as an iconic representation of an Indian god. So it's deliberately left completely confusing and unrecognizable. It's the very idea of a deity. Chanda goes from time to time to visit him at the temple. She strikes up little conversations with him as he sits there patiently waiting for her. She sometimes takes him a little jasmine flower as a gift, as we see in this painting. And the painter gives us a metaphor, like the meeting of the deer and the tiger, the gazelle and the tiger, the pretty gazelle, the doe and the tiger meeting. So there are these little sort of metaphors which creep into the painted text, which are quite interesting. Here you can see the kind of script. The language is Avdhi. Avdhi is a kind of Eastern UP dialect of Hindi, of modern Hindi, one of the languages from which modern Hindi clearly derives, except the script is Arabic. And that's quite significant, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, despite Biraspat and Lauric's contrivances, the two lovers found it increasingly hard to meet at the temple, and this separation made their longing unbearable. So again, Biraspat came to their rescue. Following her plan, Lauric found an unfrequented way into the palace, and as planned, he tried to lasso a rope ladder to her balcony. But Chanda is no fool. She wants to have some fun, enjoy the romance, and she knows better than to give in too easily to the boy. So each time he manages to hook the rope ladder, she secretly unhooks it from the balcony, right? And just increasing the chase and making it harder for him. And there in the painting in the dead of night on the starry sky, you see there is the strong man Lauric transformed. He used to be a mendicant. His body used to be covered in ash, like the way a sadhu usually does, covers his body with ash. But his body, which used to be a symbol of a cremated and a dead body, is now transformed into a virile and living body. Two completely contrasting iconographic formats, as you see him throwing up the rope ladder. We know it's a scene of night. There's a lamp burning in her apartment. But she also knows that if she keeps the chase on for too long, he'll just get frustrated and go away. So the third time he manages to lasso the ladder there, she lets it be. And then you see here, this is a very important moment in the story about the romance, and so you see it in different pages. These are in the Berlin manuscript. The previous one was in the Varanasi manuscript. As I was saying, Chanda is no fool. And she knows that if she plays too hard to get, or if he gets too frustrated, he may never return. So on the third attempt, Lauric was able to anchor his rope ladder to Chanda's balcony. Chanda runs back to her bed and pretends to be asleep. In the dark of the night, he stole into Chanda's apartment. The rainy monsoon night is a standard Indian metaphor for the union of lovers, inhabited in Bollywood films even now, which forms the backdrop against which the poet elaborates, rather graphically, their passionate first encounter. Now the red bed that you see, that's a standard poetic and artistic contrivance as a scene of love in Indian paintings. And even in the Chaura Panchasika manuscript, which is, like I was saying, also comes from the pre-Mughal period, also has this repeated depiction of a red bed as the site where lovers will meet. And of course, in the Rylands manuscript, we have it absolutely graphically expressed that they had this very passionate first encounter, and these paintings exist. And you know, you are just about absorbing the symbolism of that golden door, that archway in the painting as you spot it, and everyone's trying to wonder what is that symbol there, and does it have any phallic connotation or not? And you know, the art historian is wondering, you turn the page, and there it is again, a page later, they're still at it. And you realize that the painter this is amongst the earliest group of painted manuscripts with erotic themes that survive in India. You turn the page, and there is the young Chanda seated in front of an old retainer, an old maid of her household, who is quizzing her. And she's looking at the state of Chanda in the morning, and Chanda is busy defending herself. No, 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 these scratches are by that awful cat who came into my room last night. And it is so charming the way this manuscript begins to unfold gradually. And you're getting more and more involved, and you can imagine how Mullah Dawood is beginning to keep his audience completely in rapture as they come back to hear the next episode, and they come back to hear the next episode every week. For 52 weeks, he will tell the story over an entire year. Go back to an age when there's no television, and you can see how important these kinds of stories may have been. Now, a fantastic opportunity presented itself to the lovers. A local month-long festival at the temple involved the men to gather in the evenings, something called a Jagrata, happens widely all over India, to hear recitations at the temple festival. Lauric uses the foil to pursue his trysts. So he leaves his wife and mother at home every night for this month-long festival because he has a valid excuse to join the other boys at this temple festival. And he goes instead to meet Chanda. And you see them in the apartment time and again in a fantastically conceptual sky. You know that it's the night, but it's a tempestuous night every time. It's a thundering and a violent night. And you see all the people in the apartment are asleep, all the people outside, while these two meet. Except when love is blossoming like this, it can't be kept too secret. And finally, Chanda can take it no more and she can't hide this. And she has to let her friends and her other ladies in waiting know what's going on. And so finally they come in on this and they're there and they're serving them in the apartment. But Chanda's parents still don't know what's going on. About 21 days later, Chanda's other ladies in waiting now share her confidences. But Lauric is becoming increasingly divided. And you have this very interesting painting of the fortified town. The Dhobi is bashing the life out of clothes outside the village, outside the fortified town. A lovely little detail. Now there is his wife, the dark Mena, offering him something, and he can't take anything from his wife's hand anymore. He can't accept anything from his wife. On the other hand, we see him with the fair Chanda, and he's happily involved with her. And so there is the life of this divided man now. We're expected to sympathize with his situation. And well, his mother tries to comfort him. She suspects what is going on, but it's not adding up. The wife is becoming more and more suspicious. And that gesture of one finger at the lip is a standard gesture used in painting for wonderment, curiosity. And she's got that gesture of curiosity to say, I wonder what's going on. Even his mother isn't being able to get through to him. Now, at the end of the month, the men were going for this festival every night. At the end of this 1 month ritual, the women have to finally go to the temple and perform the last ceremonies in the daytime. And all the women go to the village. Chanda goes, and Mena, being a rich princess, is brought on a palanquin. She comes there too. And when Mena, that's the wife, sees Chanda come to the temple as this beautiful Nayaka, a beautiful heroine, looking exquisite and radiant and beautiful in her lovely clothes, pulling a thorn out from her foot, which is the standard gesture of erotic love, of being pricked by love, as it were. And you see her pulling the thorn out of her foot. That moment, using this classical metaphor, Mena is absolutely convinced that this woman is having an affair with her husband. And she's not going to stand for this anymore. And she publicly attacks Chanda. And an absolutely violent fight breaks out between the two women. And just in case we didn't know who it was, the painter even gives them labels. Mena, Chanda. As they tear each other's hair out, and they are busy kicking each other, as you can see here. And it's like one fish attacking another fish in the stormy waters. And so this is a crucial moment in the story, and the scene can be found in 4 manuscripts. And there are several pages devoted to this fight between the women. In fact, the fight gets pretty violent. They start kicking each other in the groin. And the fight gets so bad that even the presiding deity, the statue in the temple, decides to run away. And that's the most charming part of the story, that there you see the deity who's left the empty temple behind because the statue has decided to do a runner. You can't bear this fight between the two women. So it's got an element of humor between communities, which is quite nice to see that. Now, the word of the fight reaches Lauric on the one hand, and word of the fight reaches Chanda's parents on the other hand. And this is not good, because what's going to be done now? Chanda is ashamed by the public knowledge of her adultery, and she seeks an escape. So the only way out for the lovers is that they elope. And thus begins over a year spent in veritable exile. Now this is now turning into a standard Indian epic story. Because in all Indian epics, there is a format of a period of exile. The Aranyaka Parva, the section of the Sanskrit story in which there is a period when they live in the forest. And so this is following the standard convention of an Indian story, where the two lovers now go into exile into the forest. So we will call this the period of exile, like a standard Indian story. The lovers' peregrinations took them from town to town, adventure to misadventure. Their myriad encounters brought them to unsupportive siblings, to snake bites, to battles against local toll collectors, cheating gamblers, fraudulent yogis, amorous kings, each desiring Chanda more than the other. So this girl's a bit of a liability. She's so pretty that everyone wants her. But Lauric is a brave mercenary, and he has to seek new patrons wherever he goes and offer himself to yet another lord. And so you see him there bowing down, and there is the fair Chanda behind him. But no sooner than he accepts the patronage of some other Rai, the Rai falls in love with Chanda. And then he has to escape from there, go to the next village, where something else happens and somebody else falls in love with Chanda. So this is what goes on then for week after week of the telling of the story. Like I was saying, sometimes he has to fight somebody who's, you see all these fights that he's having, as I was saying, page after page. The one great episode that happens is that Chanda gets bitten by a snake at one point. We'll just come to that. There, she's been bitten by a snake. A fantastically graphic sky closing in on him, and this diagonal and sinuous depiction of a tree. Now the curious thing is, these paintings are iconographically consistent over a 75-year period and over a broad geographical span. Some are painted as far east as Jaunpur, which is near Varanasi, and some are painted in Mandu, in Western India. Some are allegedly painted in North India, around Delhi. And it seems that although in distinct styles, they are iconographically consistent paintings. So for instance, this is that Mandu style Bombay Brooklyn Museum manuscript in its pale colors. And then you see the same thing in the Berlin manuscript. Very different style, but very similar iconography. Same kind of tree, same kind of sky closing in. So Lauric is inconsolable, tearing his hair out, beating his chest, doesn't know how to rescue his beautiful Chanda who might be dying till he finds a local doctor. The doctor rescues her, saves her, and then he has to do something about getting rid of the doctor, because the doctor ends up falling in love with her. Okay, so this story carries on, and then finally, at some point, they manage to spend an entire year together, undisturbed. And that becomes a moment in the story of tremendous marital bliss for Chanda. They finally manage to settle down somewhere, and they manage to spend this perfect year together. And there you see her, the fair Chanda has become a housewife, and she is cooking for him, and he is there taking her leave, in the morning as he goes to work. And, it's a perfect scene of marital bliss that they experience. But after a year of this blissful rapport between the couple, he starts missing Mummy. And he starts wondering how he's ever going to go back and make amends with his family. And so his wife and his mother have had to fend for themselves in this period of his absence. And he doesn't know what's going on, so he decides to go back home. But they're not completely foolhardy. And they park themselves a few miles out of, the text in fact tells us, they park themselves 30 courses of unit of distance away from the main city, and they live outside the village, and they're just waiting to test the waters. And the way they decide to test the waters is that one day Lauric decides to ease his conscience by telling a local Mali, a gardener, to take a bouquet of flowers and present one to every house in the village as a gift from some anonymous person. He doesn't want to send the gift only to his own family, because then it'll be clear as to who has sent it. But he wants the gardener to have an excuse to talk to his mother and his wife and just find out how they are before he goes there himself. So everyone in the village is sent a bouquet from this anonymous man, and this bouquet, when it reaches his house, the gardener starts talking to the wife and to the mother and brings a message back to Lauric and Chanda, who are living outside the village. Mena, the wife, gets suspicious. This is a bit random, these bouquets coming out of nowhere, and she wants to get to the bottom of why this is happening. Somebody tells her that there is a small community of milkmen, the cowherds. Remember, Lauric is an Ahir. He's used to living on the outskirts of a village, and he goes to check out, his wife goes to check them out, to see which is this new community of cowherds that has come to live outside. And when she is on her way there, our hero, Lauric, decides to do something even more reprehensible. He decides to test her out. And he's disguised, and she has gone in complete parda, with her face fully covered, and she's not looking up at him. He disguises his voice, and he tries to make sexual advances towards her, to check out whether she's become the kind of woman who's now accepting men's overtures, because her husband has been away so long. And she fights him off, and he is quite pleased about that, and then he carries on spying on her. And she manages to get to the community of cowherds outside the village, and she strikes up a conversation while she's there. And this is rather interesting, because she, with misgivings about returning home, like I was saying, well, these are paintings of how they're living with the cowherds outside the village. There we are. Mena and Chanda have a meeting. Again. And this is a subsequent stage of the meeting. When they first met, they were both in disguise. Mena disguised herself as a milkmaid, and along with her friends went to the camp. Lauric immediately recognized her, but concealed his identity and decided to test her fidelity. He attempted to seduce her with provocative remarks and amorous gestures, at which the angered Mena let him know that she was already married. Now, Chanda and Mena, when they started up their conversation, Mena tells Chanda about the less than admirable qualities of men. And Chanda decides to defend men. Mena carries on with saying that, you can never trust a man. And Chanda says, oh no, you've obviously been betrayed in love. Love is the only thing to fight for. And Mena can't bear this conversation anymore about this woman who's giving her lessons on adultery. And she decides to throw off her clothes and her disguise, and the two start fighting once again, because they know who they are. And so again, it's a violent fight. And so you get again another 6 or 10 pages of them fighting. Okay. Now we should end the main story before we analyze it. The interesting thing is that the resolution of the story is met in no conclusive way in any of the surviving manuscripts. But two endings to this story are known. One ending is that Lauric decides to cohabit with his wife, provided she accepts Chanda as a junior wife. And then he goes back home to live happily ever after with his mother and both women. That's one ending. The other ending is that the poet tells us that he lived like that with the three women in his life for a short while, experiencing the state of complete bliss. But men like this are always seeking, and they can never find true happiness. And the last we heard was that he had forsaken all three women, and we had seen him wandering the ghats of Banaras, still seeking. Now that's what I call the Satyajit Ray ending to the story, where you see this poetic man wandering the ghats of Banaras, seeking some kind of resolution and answer. The story does not end with the family reunion. Eventually, Lauric returned home and lived with his mother and both women, who accepted both women as her daughters-in-law. Lauric then took it upon himself to avenge his family honor by fighting all those who had badmouthed him and disrespected Colin and Mena in his absence. Okay. Now, the paintings are quite interesting. There you see him bathed and ritually purified, coming back home, and his wife is accepting him at the threshold so that he can come back into his house. And there he is with both the women. Now, were this manuscript complete, it is unlikely that it would have been, any one of the manuscripts would have been painted by one painter. Like I noted at the beginning of the talk, no signatures or dated colophons are yet known for these manuscripts. Finding the style of individual hands is not easy, as the paintings follow a schematized and conventionalized style. Minor variations, however, in the figures, palette, and decorative devices may suggest the work of more than one artist. A study of these 5 manuscripts actually takes us through an art historical study of the 5, and there are only 5, major styles of pre-Mughal or Sultanate period painting. On a first examination of this manuscript, it became clear to me how the artist had used a very limited set of formulae repeatedly. Now, had we a complete set of 500 paintings to base our analysis on, we would have been less affected by the routine and formulaic compositions. Even so, the repetitions in this manuscript are compelling. For instance, there are 22 paintings that show a king meeting the Wazir. 15 scenes of battle are resolved due to very similar compositional stratagems. The curving sky closing in over Lauric when Chanda nearly dies of snakebite is repeated often. The nature of the fight between the two women, each tearing each other's hair out as they fight, clearly, even though their individual styles may be different, the artist has a limited repertoire of compositional and iconographic conventions. And these prefigure the many Mughal styles and the Rajput styles of painting that were going to become quite common from the late 16th and through the 18th century. Now, this is a curious story that should be selected. Our text can be appreciated at several levels, 2 of which interest me. First, the sociological and historical importance of the story of Lauric and Chanda. And second, the Sufi content of the Chandayan, as distinct from the Laur-Chanda. Both text and performance of oral epics exert enormous cultural force. Epic performances ritually protect and cure, while epic narratives express local ideologies and form pathways between a regional identity and a national identity. Oral epics in India have that special ability to tell a community's own story and thus help to create and maintain a community's own identity. It is only to be expected that an organic oral epic will have varied patterns of growth and reception, constantly challenging the painters to be faithful to the particular telling that they are being asked to illustrate. The story has all the marks of a folk or an oral epic, a fixed theme, a fixed meter, but no fixed text. Although subtle and imperceptible, the change in intent of an originally folk ballad to its reception as a Sufi story has in fact created a major taxonomic shift for us. What was a folk ballad of Laur-Chanda, where an anonymous poet was liberally reinvented in every folk recitation, is now fixed in a Sufi narrative. This shift is accompanied by a number of other changes. Some are more obvious than others. This used to be an oral, a non-literate, a non-Islamic text that is now being used for Sufi as well as literate bourgeois ends. Now the Chandayan is not alone in this phenomenon. Many other manuscripts like the Mrigavat, the Hansavali, the Padmavat, they're all being selected at this time and they're being turned into Sufi stories. They're all being turned into the earliest body of Hindi literature at exactly this time. I would like to extend this paradigm by looking at these Sultanate illustrated manuscripts as part of the same tradition. Exceptionally though, this particular story was converted into a text at what appears to be a very early date for such a phenomenon, and in a region that noted both widespread conversion to Islam and has been inadequately explored in the construction of a religio-cultural and social history heretofore. I think what's all the more interesting for us is that the oldest surviving texts of Hindi literature are written in Arabic script. And I think that's a very important cultural code. It's not because Hindi as a language is not older, it's just that it wasn't being, Sanskrit literature is being written in Devanagari script. But the common parlance of Braj and Avadhi and these kinds of languages are being codified in Arabic script. And that's a very interesting case of cultural encounter as well. Our illustrated manuscripts, however, exist within the strict confines of a text first penned by Mullah Dawood. Now, looking at similar case studies of other Sufi stories, John F. Richards has noted that the idealization and deification of the Sufi saint seem to be processes which myths in India undergo in the course of being retold in time. This is exactly what we see in our paintings, where Mullah Dawood is presented in the top right corner of most of the painted pages, where his presence is necessary on the painting, the teller of the story. Mullah Dawood not only becomes the hallowed teller or reteller of this now Sufi narrative, his repeated presence, painted and narrated in the manuscripts, underscores the legitimacy the text derives from his presence. This is also a part of a wider phenomenon that was growing in this period, the sanctification of the Pir, or the Sufi saint. The folk story of Laur and Chanda was Sufiized by Mullah Dawood in 1379 AD, and his Chandayan made a strong bid to enter the canon of Indian literature. A text was collated and fixed, it was penned, even its author celebrated, and yet curiously, the Sufi recitations and certainly illustrations of it seem to have been an expressly late 14th to early 16th century Indian happening, almost as if its fugitive attempt at entering the Indian textual tradition allowed this popular ballad that right only as a guest en passant. The Chandayan then seems to have reverted to its origins as folk recitations of the Loriki, the Chanaini, the Chandayani, and any other form this ballad which never ceased. These folk recitations have continued till at least about 20 years ago. In some versions of theoretical retelling, the whole text, in fact, survives not as a secular narrative, but as a veritable theophany. This is achieved by presenting Laur as some kind of semi-divine figure who is protected by the gods. The entire epic, in that case, becomes his mythology, and its performance is in itself a ritual or a liturgical one. Furthermore, because it becomes a ritually embedded story, you have to understand that it comes out of a non-Islamic ritual context. If this folkloric story comes from a ritual or a liturgical basis, it has to come from a non-Islamic one. Along with its strong non-Islamic content, which is quite obvious in this story, how does this book, with its many stories of yogis and temple deities, enter a Sufi context? How is it being used to tell from the pulpit by a Mullah Dawood in the 14th century? What makes it appropriate for him to absorb such a story? Now, Sufism is rather oversimplistically put about mystical devotion, about love and union with God. Lauric's love for Chanda sees him break all boundaries of convention. In sympathizing with Lauric and accepting him, the audience finds a space for the transgressive, the millenarian, the dissenting social, political, and religious voice. So it's a very curious anti-hero that he forms. The role of the Hindu context, the jokes about the deity who runs away from the temple, the respect and imprecation of the Hindu context, the shrine, the yogi, within a Sufi discourse. In this folk ballad, thus, lies embedded another, and not necessarily religious or moral message. It contains within it a social narrative of a community, the community of the Ahirs, who live on the fringes of medieval Indian, urban, Persianized and Brahmanized citizenry. In its adoption by the Sufis, a fundamental shift occurs in the import, context, and patronage of our story. It is no longer the preserve and expression of the Ahirs and their concern, but becomes part of a much larger establishment. This brings us to the second aim of my analysis. Some changes in this story were made by Mullah Dawood, but these were more in the nature of a collation and editing of current folklores concerning Lauric and Chanda. He also introduced several Persian words into the story. But how did Mullah Dawood, his congregation, and the subsequent Sufi tradition see no contradiction in using such a popular folk epic without making any changes to the fundamental narrative for their own purpose? This, after all, is the story about a man who abandons his wife, certainly not honorable, and runs away with another's. Over a year later, he returns home where he never once apologizes to his wife. The enraged wife fights with her husband's lover. At this point, in a chauvinistic display of condescension, the protagonist agrees to cohabit with his wife provided she is A, able to prove her fidelity to him over the year that he himself has been away with another woman, and B, agrees to accept his lover as a junior wife. Moreover, he subscribes to a rather obscure cult, which, as the paintings show us, has elaborate rituals that show its changing, unrecognizable divinity with a blood-filled skull cap in his hand. Indeed, it is clear that he follows a non-mainstream cult. How then is this character suited to convey a Sufi message, or for that matter, any moral message? It was with this question that I began to investigate this manuscript, as to how we are supposed to and why we would empathize with this character. And that brought me to the story about examining the nature of love that he experiences with each of the three women. Compassion, constancy, and passion. The mother, the wife, the lover, built up via three richly developed characters. So three kinds of ishq, three kinds of love that he experiences. Then we are told that these three kinds of love are preordained. The three paris, the three fairies who are supposed to have come to him, and this whole story was a myth, right, about a hero from some other world, and they were sent to Earth to experience this. Ours is, therefore, what is called a multi-story epic. In its treatment of divinity and spirituality, it exists, and it would have been received at two sharply distinct levels. The first is the Sufi way of accepting the story, and the other is called, shall we call it Hindu, for want of a better word. Lauric, our protagonist, in a modern politically correct discourse would be reprehensible to most. Yet he is our main protagonist, the tool through which a religiously sanctioned moral sermon is being delivered. Why? How? Now, while our narrative can be superficially read as a love story and as a conflict between heroes and villains, at a deeper level, what those narratives are really about is a personal or an existential conflict. This conflict is most clearly alluded to in the many deaths that Lauric endures in his lifetime. Throughout the narrative, each symbolic death is referring to the shedding of a yet another part of his ego, and in each case it brings him closer to God. All of Lauric's wars and fights are, in the final analysis, selfless. He's a mercenary, remember? He's never passionately involved. He's never fighting for himself. He's doing his duty. He's earning a wage. He becomes a yogi. During the period when he becomes a yogi, he discards his material body. He covers himself with ash, like the way a sadhu does. He takes the material of the cremation and covers himself with the material of the cremation. His external body, has undergone a death, even though he lives in a temple like a monk. He is inconsolable he's distraught and he's nearly dead when his lover dies. We saw in the paintings. He goes through these many stages of separation and death-like experiences in his lifetime, each alluding to a death of the mundane. His separation from his beloved underscores the very Sufi sentiment of love. Even the scene in which Lauric laments Chanda's death by snakebite, both painted and narrated references to the scene dwell on Lauric's pain and near death on account of the anguish he felt. Rightfully so, for that is where the Sufi import of this story lies. So in summing up, what we really have over here is a very curious and interesting folk ballad, which comes into the canon of Indian literature and then disappears back into folklore, because when Abul Fazl, the chronicler of the Emperor Akbar, writes, he says, there used to be this popular story, we used to hear about it, but it's not heard of anymore. So the story disappears back into folklore. And it's very interesting to see the dynamics of how something as a piece of literature or as a piece of folklore becomes a work of literature, goes back into being folklore. It's very interesting to see what kind of tools are being adopted to create a new Sufi context in northern India. What are the kind of stories that they're picking on? The popular, the millenarian, the everyday. How racy these stories are, and what their appeal might have been, and the kind of sociological concerns. The man in the story lives on the margins of society, even in his own village. He is the kind of audience that is being converted by the telling of this story. This is the kind of protagonist, and his people are being incorporated into the Sufi dargah at this time, because they have a voice in that space of the Sufi silsila by this time. And so you have a very interesting case which shows us the kind of social dynamics that were at work in medieval India at the time through the study of just this one story. Thank you.